Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind.
Of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder.
Защищая нашу общую родину, чтобы сегодняшние неонацисты захватили власть на Украине.
Some lies don't need to be hidden, they just need to be well dressed. They arrive cloaked in the familiar, official statements, press releases, carefully chosen words that sound reasonable but blur the truth. When war becomes peacekeeping, torture becomes enhanced interrogation, and mass surveillance is sold as national security, the deception isn't in what's being said, it's in the language itself. Orwell wasn't simply criticizing bad writing, he was exposing a tool of power. Political language, he argued, doesn't just obscure reality, it replaces it. It creates a parallel world where contradiction becomes coherence and cruelty hides behind abstraction. The terrifying part is how easily people adapt to it, how, over time, vague language begins to produce vague thinking. George Orwell wasn't just critiquing how politicians speak, he was trying to uncover why the decay of language matters so deeply. In his 1946 essay, Politics and the English Language, he argued that vague, bloated, or euphemistic language doesn't just reflect unclear thinking, it actively produces it. When we rely on prefabricated phrases or abstract jargon, we stop engaging with the actual meaning behind our words, and when meaning slips, so does accountability. He writes, "A speaker who uses that kind of language has gone some distance toward turning himself into a machine." It's a striking image, language not as expression, but automation. Words used not to clarify thought, but to obscure it. For Orwell, this wasn't just sloppy communication, it was a form of intellectual surrender. The more we rely on empty phrases, the less we're able to confront the truth, let alone resist it. This connection between language and thought is at the heart of Orwell's philosophy. He believed that clear language is a moral responsibility, because when language collapses, so does our ability to reason, to judge, and to act. Deceit becomes easier. Violence becomes abstract. Reality becomes negotiable. And this wasn't just a theory. Orwell saw it unfolding during wars, under totalitarian regimes, and in the quiet bureaucracies of his time. But he didn't just describe what was happening. He imagined what might come next. A world where language itself becomes the battleground. In his book, 1984, Orwell took his fears about language to their most extreme conclusion. He imagined a future where the state doesn't just police actions, it polices thought itself. And the primary weapon in this psychological war isn't guns or prisons, it's a language called Newspeak. Newspeak is a constructed vocabulary designed not to expand human expression, but to shrink it. Its purpose is chilling in its simplicity, to eliminate the possibility of rebellious or even independent thought by removing the very words needed to express it. Words like freedom, justice, or democracy are reduced, distorted, or erased entirely. Why? Because if you can't say it, you'll eventually stop thinking it. One of the party members explains it this way. Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. This is where Orwell's philosophical insight cuts deepest. Language isn't just a tool we use, it's the framework within which our thoughts are formed. If you manipulate that framework, you don't just control speech, you begin to control the mind. And then there's doublethink, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs at once and accept both as true. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. This isn't bad logic. It's strategic confusion. It's the mental consequence of living in a world where language has been bent so thoroughly that it no longer points to truth but to power. But here's the twist. Newspeak doesn't rely on force to succeed. It works best when people willingly adopt it. When the public begins using the state's language to describe their own world, the system sustains itself. And that's not science fiction. That's something we've already seen and are still seeing every day. Orwell wrote 1984 as a warning, not a prediction. But parts of his vision have already materialized, not through totalitarian rule, but through everyday language that quietly reshapes how we perceive the world. Consider how often euphemism is used not to soften meaning, but to conceal it. Collateral damage replaces civilian deaths. Enhanced interrogation masks what is clearly torture. Extraordinary rendition makes forced disappearance sound like a bureaucratic procedure. These aren't just neutral substitutions. They're engineered to reduce emotional impact, to make the unacceptable seem routine. And it's not just governments. Corporations talk about downsizing instead of mass layoffs, pre-owned instead of used, and content moderation instead of censorship. Each phrase is crafted to deflect attention, soften criticism, and avoid moral scrutiny. The effect isn't just semantic, it's psychological. If we keep hearing the wrong thing described the right way, we may stop noticing that it's wrong at all. Even social media contributes to this linguistic drift. Buzzwords, slogans, hashtags, they compress complex issues into easily shareable fragments. The more our thinking is shaped by this kind of language, the more likely we are to mistake rhetoric for reality. Orwell feared a future where language would be reduced to clichés and formulae, where meaningful expression would be drowned in pre-packaged phrases. In many ways, that future arrived. We just didn't notice it, because it came with user-friendly design and optimized engagement. But here's the unsettling question. What happens when we start using this language on ourselves? When we adopt euphemisms to justify our own choices, or repeat phrases we've heard without questioning what they actually mean? Orwell's critique isn't just about propaganda. It's about the subtle erosion of thought in a culture that stops demanding clarity. Orwell wasn't a neuroscientist, but he grasped something that modern psychology and linguistics would later confirm. Language doesn't just record what we think, it influences how we think. This idea resonates with what's known in cognitive science as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, or linguistic relativity. The basic claim is that the structure of a language can shape its speaker's perceptions of reality. If your language has no word for a particular concept, like freedom, guilt, or future tense, you may be less likely to notice, feel, or even imagine it. It's not that thought becomes impossible, but it becomes harder, less natural, less available. Orwell dramatized this with Newspeak, but the real-world version is subtler. When language becomes saturated with euphemisms, buzzwords, or binary choices, our thinking becomes constrained. We start to speak in pre-formed phrases and think in pre-approved categories. And as Orwell noted, the more often we do this, the less we engage with the actual substance of ideas. We might mistake repetition for reasoning or slogans for solutions. There's also a psychological tendency at play, semantic distancing. When we use gentler or more technical terms for morally charged acts, we create emotional distance. Neutralizing a target feels less visceral than killing someone. But the reality hasn't changed, only our emotional proximity to it has. That's exactly the kind of mental insulation Orwell feared. Orwell understood that the struggle for freedom doesn't begin on the battlefield. It begins in the mind. And the battleground is language. Once our words lose their precision, our thoughts lose their sharpness. And once that happens, manipulation doesn't need to be violent. It just needs to be persuasive. This is what makes Orwell's critique so enduring. It's not just a warning about totalitarianism or propaganda. It's a call for vigilance in the most ordinary aspects of life. how we write, how we speak, how we think. Because the decay of language is rarely dramatic. It happens gradually, in headlines, in slogans, in the phrases we borrow without questioning. He believed that clear language was not just a stylistic preference, but an ethical obligation. If we want to see clearly, we have to speak clearly, because without clarity there can be no resistance. And without resistance, there can be no freedom. So the next time you hear a phrase that feels too smooth, too rehearsed, or too empty, pause. Ask what's being hidden, and who benefits from the confusion. Because as Orwell showed us, controlling language isn't just about shaping communication, it's about shaping reality itself. If you found value in this video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And join us on our journey of discovering ourselves, the world around us, and the greatest minds and ideas. Thank you very much for watching.